We welcome you back to the show. Forensic experts have been carrying out days of work at the site of the crashed Malaysian plane more than 2 weeks after the Malaysian aircraft went down in the war zone. In addition to the 298 passengers who died, more than 1,500 people are believed to have been killed in the conflict, which erupted in East Ukraine in April.
The OSCE mission in Ukraine escorts half a dozen experts from the Netherlands and Australia to the main Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 crash sites. The Dutch team finds traces of human remains, along with passports, ID cards, and credit cards.
Doing an assessment, mapping, they're doing GPS coordinates. And the kind of new discovery today are some personal belongings.
As the team identifies more bodies, the next batch of 74 coffins travels on one Dutch Hercules C-130 plane and an Australian Boeing C-17 cargo plane.
This will be a police-led humanitarian mission and, of course, will ensure that they are safe.
Elsewhere, the counterintelligence chief from Ukraine's Secret Service says he has proof that Russian citizens fired the Buk missile that took down flight MH17.
There were Russian citizens operating Buk M1 early in the morning, 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. There were two Buk M1s going directly to Russia. And at 4 a.m. there were three heavy trucks with one was empty, one was with Buk M1, and one was with operational car that helps to operate Buk M1.
All 298 people aboard Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 were killed when the plane went down on the 17th of July.
Dee Dee, Albert, and Tom in our D.C. studios continue our discussions. And joining us now is Dr. Alex Mirescu from St.Peters University. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Now, within the last hour, we have learned that there has been fighting, and some of those forensic experts have actually been pulled out of the area. Obviously, these are Dutch and Australian forensic experts. Let's talk about this past week. We also saw that President Obama was pressing Vladimir Putin for diplomatic solutions in the area. We'll just ask you to, Dr. Mirescu, just to comment on that.
In terms of the diplomatic front, yeah, there have been some efforts, more direct efforts, to approach Putin on getting engaged in the process. But effectively, what's going on is there are multiple parallels, or there are two primary parallels. There is the diplomatic pressure on the one end, but then there is this rapid increase in US-EU sanctions, which is not helping. Neither one is helping each other, really. And it's a test to see how durable Putin's stance is against the sanctions.
And I was just going to say, I wanted to talk about those sanctions and whether we think this is going to be put any kind of a dent on Putin. Dee Dee, your thoughts?
Yeah, probably not. I mean, Putin seems to be like, he's going to move forward as long as he can. Obama has been weak on this. And, he won't even admit. We talked about this last week. I mean, we know it was Russian rockets. We know that it was sophisticated, so the Russians had to be involved. And he's still acting like, well, we didn't have anything to do with it. So, at least you're going to own him to that, but he hasn't.
Now, there were a couple of headlines. Now, obviously, we know that the army in the Ukraine is much smaller. But a lot of folks are saying that Ukraine's army was too weak, but not anymore. That was one of the headlines. And Tom, just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I'm not quite sure of the strength and the capabilities of the Ukrainian army, but I would think that at this point, the new president is going to do as much as he can to beef up his military. Don't forget, on this show a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was months now, when the whole Crimea thing was unfolding, we talked about what Putin's next steps may be. We all lamented the fact that the Ukrainian military was somewhat powerless with the Russian troops down in the Crimea. I think that that's a recognizable need by the Ukraine government, and they're moving to address it. But a military solution is something that it's extraordinary to think about. If you go back to the Cold War days of containment of Russia and all that, you have a country like Ukraine whose military is growing but not capable of taking on the Russian military by itself in any form or fashion. that means a lot more than just economic sanctions for the world to consider.
Well, I was going to ask the panel, and we'll start with you, Tom. Do you think there will be a full-scale invasion by Russia?
I believe that what we've talked about before on this show and elsewhere is that Putin will continue to do what he thinks he can get away with in any form or fashion. First the Crimea, as we talked about, and now this. You know, he thrives on chaos. He sees himself in his route to power of the person who could put the solution together, whether it's diplomatic or military. He wants Europe to come to him, and he wants to sideline and marginalize the United States. I believe that that's his plan. I have no proof of that. That's just my feeling from what I see and what my instincts tell me while history has told us. So he can use the Ukraine, he manipulate the situation in Ukraine. Don't forget, he can shut the lever off on the gas that's delivered to Europe, which they're worried about. And the sanctions that the United States want to push are not always favored by some of the countries in the EU. So it's a very complicated situation, and no country wants to go to war with Russia.
And we've seen a lot of the European countries.
No Western country.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. And a lot of the European countries have been very quiet. For that very reason. But I did ask Tom that question. Do you think that there will be an invasion by Russia? And this is just an opinion. Albert, we'll start with you.
It's highly unlikely unless the West pushes President Putin into a position in which he has no route to escape. His background as an intelligence officer and his psychological makeup, President Putin basically doesn't feel he has to explain or justify his actions to anyone. He is surrounded by people that he trusts, which is an incredibly small circle of people. And we talk about, let's say, applying sanctions to the oligarchs. The oligarchs, he owns the oligarchs. There are only a handful of them. They answer to Putin, and they have to report to him directly. And with respect to cutting off possibly the gas to many of the European countries, he can play and leverage that threat. And the worst case scenario, he just signed a deal with China. He can ship as much gas as he wants to China. Key thing for Putin is the energy, the oil, gas, and any of the infrastructure to transport it. So as long as he keeps that there in place, he will have enough funds and cash to keep going and play a lot of games with us.
So is it time to open up the reserves here?
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I've been very consistent about Putin. He's going to push and push and push as far as he can. I absolutely think he's going to invade Ukraine. I mean, he is leading up to that. Strategically, he's taking over everything he can around Ukraine, and then when the time is right, he'll swoop in and invade, of course.
Dr. Mirescu, if we can ask you, how important is this area to the separatists?
How important is it to the separatists? Well, I mean, you have to understand, and we've over the past several weeks and months, we've kind of digressed from what the original issue is. And the original issue is that we have an ethnically divided, linguistically divided country, and in the 20 years of Ukrainian independence, especially the south and the east, Crimea and the majority Russian areas of the Ukraine have been largely ignored and neglected by development funds and development projects within the Ukraine. So there is, in fact, a fairly credible and measurable amount of disdain towards what they would call the more European or Western Ukraine. That issue, I mean, we're talking about military advancements. I strongly disagree. I don't think Russia will invade. I agree with the other two guests. However, what needs to be addressed after all this military engagement ends is what do you do with the millions of Russians in eastern Ukraine who need to be both politically, linguistically, and culturally re-engaged. And after major military conflict, that is very, very difficult, extremely difficult.
And Tom, we want to get a couple thoughts from you as well. You've been hearing Dr. Mirescu talk about that. Your thoughts? If you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I basically follow what was just, I just follow basically what was just said. I think Putin has a natural base there of Russian speakers who have felt isolated. It's the same in countries around the world. You have different groups within an artificially created country. The borders of Ukraine have shifted over the centuries, as we know. Engaging all areas of population reduces Putin's ability to sort of usurp them and promise them things that they can't seem to have today. It's not an easy solution. It's a long-term solution. You need consistency. You need a Lincoln in office, as I used to like to say, and we need to see that in Ukraine.
Yeah, and Poroshenko is not that Lincoln at the moment, unfortunately.
We also want to talk about...
I'll let you judge. Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see what the next year's brings.
We also want to talk about, of course, the crash investigation. Albert, we were talking about that. there's already been 200 coffins that have been sent back home to the Netherlands. Anything else, I mean, that you see that will be done, the follow-up in the next couple of weeks?
Again, the crash site is, for all intents and purposes, a crime scene.
Sure.
And unfortunately, it's been compromised right from the very get-go. How much information we can get out of there, I'm really not sure. The black boxes will only confirm that, you know, how the aircraft was hit by the missile.
It may hold some clues that I've been reading about whether it was a Russian missile or where it came from.
Correct, or what type of missile. Other than that, it's...
a black box can't tell what type of missile. It can only tell that.
No,
it's
you
been
can
hit.
only tell by the actual airplane parts that have fallen.
Okay,
the type of signature that's left
That's
on
true,
physically
yeah.
on the aircraft, not the black box itself.
Yep.
I do also want to mention, we have about a minute left in this segment. At this time, right now, Benjamin Netanyahu has been on the airwaves saying that Israel is going to start backing down. Do we think that this is going to last and we're going to see peace in the Middle East?
No. No, because every time Benjamin Netanyahu makes a good faith effort to do this, you know, we had the Palestinians sending another rocket to get it started again, and he has already made it clear he's not going to take that. So no, I don't think so. It's going to last. No.
Tom, very quickly, we're asking all of our panel.
Nope.
Thank you very much for that. Albert, your thoughts on this?
No, not at all. Basically, he's going to remain in place, see what happens. If they are attacked once again with rockets, they will, you know, resume their program.
I think this will be an incremental back down, and I think Israel will maintain its strong security posture towards Gaza. It's just going to kind of scale back a little bit. Netanyahu will say that the majority of the tunnels have been destroyed. This was essentially a tunnel busting mission over the last month or so.
And he will declare victory on this.
Well, he has
in terms of the tunnels.
Yeah, and Hamas doesn't want to see the conflict end this way. They also want to get something out of it. And Netanyahu's probably taking the wind out of whatever sails there are left of Hamas to create a positive outcome by saying, well, we've succeeded and you haven't.
All right, well, we will watch and wait, and we will certainly be probably talking about that next week as well. And don't go away, everyone. When we come back, we're going to take a look at the national stories making headlines this week. That and much more in just 2 minutes.